right, so I'm going to call this meeting to order.
105.
105, sorry, yep, that too. And Commissioner Burke, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And our next item, thank you for coming, you folks that are out there, appreciate the attendance. We had a lengthy work session, got over at about 50 minutes ago. So ready to start piling through this meeting. And we'll start with the consent agenda.
Madam Chair, I'd like to have the minutes of March 11th, March 21st, and March 14th. Sorry. The 11th, the 14th, and the 21st pulled from the consent agenda.
And the work session? 4 of them. So 4?
There were changes on the first one also.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I think I've got it now. Okay, you want to pull those?
Yes.
And do you have a motion?
So Madam Chair, I'll move that the consent agenda be approved. We're going to do minutes first.
Either way, we can approve just the vouchers if you'd like, and then go through the minutes. Do you have any comments?
Is there a motion?
Yes, I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I will second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Just on the vouchers, as secretary, I reviewed them and just probably 3 notes of highlight. We on the Terminal 1 redevelopment, we did cut a check to Legacy Contracting for $817,000. That's we have about 32% left on that contract, or about $1 million. And then on the T1 and T3 engineering, we cut a check to Jones Strategic for about $12,000, and we got about 53% left on that. And the last one is related to the T1, T3 engineering. That was Berger Abraham, and we've got about 53% left on that one. About $89,000 left on that engineering. Everything else was mostly just operational and looked good. And I sat down with John, and the system in place for vouchers is very robust and well done.
I'd like to make one clarification. Jones Strategic was the ED.
The ED recruitment fee. Yes.
Sorry, all my micro writing there.
Yep.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And the motion carries unanimously. Okay. And so the minutes.
So, Madam Chair, I have the following revisions for minutes, and then I'll make a motion. On March 11th, the special commission meeting minutes, on page 2, the first whole sentence to read, emphasis was placed on the need for improvement because once the terminals go into disrepair, they are financially improbable to replace. Very possible.
Okay.
On the March 14th Commission work session minutes, under item Roman numeral 5B, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th line down, Mr. Lenberry's name was incorrectly spelled. It's an A instead of an E in there. And then 2 lines down from that, Mr. Lenberry commented several times that he did not keep the lease rather than leave the lease. That's the only change on that one. Then the March 14th commission meeting minutes on page 2, at the top under C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th line down. It says annual report. The word should be revenue rather than income. Annual report revenue is $24,000 plus leasehold excise tax instead of before leasehold excise tax. And on page 3, Roman numeral 13, items not on the agenda, item B, the second sentence, which begins on the second line, Ms. Goshen stated, and cross out the words, the proposed lease is exempt from public disclosure until it is approved by the commission, and, so that the sentence will then read, Ms. Goshen stated that she will discuss it with the court attorneys Chris Ripple and Simon Barnhart to determine the best way to accommodate the request. On the special commission meeting minutes of March 21st, first page, Roman numeral 6, add the words where it says discussion, the consensus was to add an RCW and policy requirements section to the IFC, paren item for consideration, and then add the words and develop an operating policy handbook in the future. And with those revisions, I will move approval of those minutes.
Okay, I believe there were 7 revisions. And we have a motion. Do we have a second? Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Early public comment session.
Carol Johnson, Executive Director of the North Olympic Timber Action Committee here in Port Angeles. I just want to give a brief update about what happened at the Timber Advisory meeting on Friday. Connie was there. It lasted nearly 5 long hours. And this was the 4th meeting. I think it's been the most productive. Before that, there's been a lot of discourse on fair treatment and all kinds of bizarre things. But I'm going to, Chris, could you pass one to Karen, Sylvia, and the 3 commissioners. The resolution that the commissioners went through in order to form this committee. And 2 and 3 are really the crux of what the committee is tasked with. And I just thought it would be interesting, if you haven't seen it, to read it. It was videotaped. This one would be a good one to go back and watch because the DNR made several presentations, and it was their DNR structure and how they pay for things and where they get their money. The most important was the sustainable harvest calculation and the arrearage. That was very important information. And then there were Rod Flex, City of Forks attorney. Toby Thaler is the environmental attorney from Seattle representing Olympic Forest Coalition. He had a presentation on arrearage, so did Rod, and then Ann Forrest Burns. The other gentleman from the Forest Law Center did not attend, so his presentation wasn't there. But this gives you some idea of what we're really discussing. And this morning in your work session, you talked about the value of the ships that come in and the cargo and that sort of thing. Even though DNR timber is not exported, they are the part of the equation. The public lands are the ones that supply the mills and are supposed to help make up the total volume of timber supply with the 3 ownerships, federal, state, and private. So anyway, this particular meeting was particularly informative. I think it will help you form some ideas and about what is going on and where we have issues. The only thing I will say is that basically the members of the environmental community sort of came in not with the idea of performing items 2 and 3 in the resolution, but moreover protecting their position. And so pay particular attention to some of the conversations that go back and forth, because the reality is there is a specific chore to take place. And I don't think they're really participating in that part of it, and they're taking up a lot of extra time. But this particular meeting will give you a good format about what is important here in the process that the commissioners have set forth. And one last comment, not on the Timber Advisory Council, but when you're speaking as an audience member, and today I am photoing for Stephanie, but some do not have voices that carry well. And if you're a member of the audience, it's very hard sometimes to hear what some people are saying. You get the context of the what you're talking about, but you only heard maybe part of the conversation. So it would be helpful for the recorder and for the citizens in the audience to speak up so that your voice carries and we can hear what you're talking about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Carol, can you share with us whose voice doesn't carry well?
I was sitting over here when I was doing the minute revision.
Okay.
I've been trying to have the microphone.
Well, you probably know it's typically not you, Colleen.
Probably not.
Not you, Connie. Up a little.
Do I have to?
And yes,
Yeah, okay.
definitely. And even John, a little bit, when you're in that circle, what happens to come out, or even up here, when you're speaking forward, it's easier to hear, but if you're at the table, you don't hear the back of people, the voice, the sound goes out the other way. And so sometimes you're missing things, and I do listen, and I'm sure others do too, and we'd like to hear everybody's viewpoint.
I was just wondering if you wanted me to speak louder.
No.
But I'm hearing you don't, so
No.
that's good.
And certainly not anything like Hillary, who just basically yells into the microphone. No, we're good, but just articulate a little bit more your voice and force it out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments from the public? Hearing none, we'll move on to item 5, planning. There are no items. Property, Art and Soul lease. So at this time, the commission will now meet in executive session to discuss one item concerning the lease of port property. The estimated time for executive session is approximately 10 minutes. The starting time is 1:16. The commission will return from executive session at 1:26, and the commission is expected to take final action following the executive session. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. All right. Thank you. We will now reconvene back to open session.
Thank you. We have a new lease for Art and Soul Hospitality LLC, doing business as Fisherman's Wharf Cafe. This building is located at 825 and 826 Boathaven Drive. The current tenant, Boathaven Marine, wishes to sell their restaurant business, Donna's Fisherman Wharf Cafe, to Art and Soul Hospitality. The current lease is a 1-year lease with 4 one-year options. The most recent option in November 2015 was not exercised, therefore the lease is currently in holdover on a month-to-month status. The parties have agreed to a sale based on the current lease ramp-up to fair market value schedule. And Art and Soul Hospitality has requested that the ramp-up rate of $958.40 apply to the first full year of the new lease to help offset their expected investment of $50,000 towards restaurant remodel and expansion into the full building. The building is owned by the port. Any tenant improvements, less restaurant equipment, will become an asset of the ports upon termination. This is an interesting older building that we have in our boatyard. The building is thought to be 50 to 60 years old. However, the first known lease was dated in 1970 and used as a sale and service of marine hardware, chandlery, boats, engines, sport, and commercial fishing gear. The lease rate at that time was $100 a month. Around March 1990, Ron and Donna Shepard began leasing the building and divided up the interior space to add the restaurant, paying the same lease rate of $398.48 until the port established a new lease rate in 2014 on the ramp-up schedule to fair market value. Staff has reached a lease agreement with Art and Soul Hospitality LLC. This includes the following components. The lease space is approximately 2,400 square foot building, approximately 100 square foot storage and typical parking for employees in the back and restaurant patrons in the front. This is a restaurant. The area is in our Marine Trades Boatyard area. And the monthly payments for year 1, $958.40. Years 2 through 5, $1255, estimated fair market rate. The term of this lease is 5 years to begin April 1st. And the tenant plans to expand the restaurant during the dining and kitchen space into the eastern portion previously used as a marine supply shop. Any improvements that the tenant takes on will be required to have the written approval of the port. Tenant pays for all utilities, and the bond security on this property is in the amount of $13,435.20, equal to the annual lease rate plus leasehold excise tax. There are no unique terms on this lease, and the environmental impact are none. The fiscal impact to the lease would be $13,435.20 initial annual revenue for the port, and a total over 5 years of $81,437. Recommended action pursuant to the port's master policy, staff recommends the commission authorize the interim executive director to sign a lease with Art and Soul Hospitality LLC per the terms and conditions as stated. Any questions?
Do we, I couldn't remember if I read it in the contract or not. Do we stipulate that any of the improvements they're gonna do would be under permit and approved by permit from the city? If we're gonna take ownership of them later, that they actually are done?
We need to approve them.
Yeah, but that is always one of their requirements.
Oh.
They need to get their own permits, they need to have their own electrical building, whatever permits required by the city. So they don't get to not comply with those regulators because they're
So
on
we
their property.
inherit a bunch of stuff that's not to code.
Right, there's a comply with all regulations and rules clause.
Any other questions? No. I was saddened when Ron Shepherd passed, and I'm sorry that Donna won't be able to continue with the business, but I'm glad that someone else has seen a future in the restaurant business and at this property. And so with that in mind, I will move to authorize the interim executive director to sign a lease with Art and Soul Hospitality LLC per the terms and conditions as stated.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and the next item is the John Wayne Marina Fee Waiver Request, City of Squam.
Yes, good afternoon. Port Resolution 848 authorizes the executive director to discount room rates, but also requires full commission approval for a full waiver of any rental rate. In this particular case, the city of Squim has approached the port and asked for a full waiver of the use rent related to the use of the room for an employee recognition event. This is an annual event that the city of Squim puts on. Normally they use their own facilities, but they're currently undergoing some construction. So they requested permission to use our meeting room at the John Wayne Marina. As a nonprofit organization, they do qualify as an organization that we could grant a rental waiver for. And so I am presenting for the jury today and have that up for your consideration.
Thank you. I have a procedural question. My other fellow commissioners, do you have anything? Is there any limit to the amount that an executive director can negotiate a reduced fee? Could they negotiate down 99%, or is it 10%? What is that amount?
There is not a limit that I am aware of.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Thank you. So, any other questions?
No, I would make a motion that we approve this request by the city of Squim for a fee waiver in the amount of $426 under the authority of Resolution 848.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, John.
And we'll make sure we get some, one of the provisions is we will waive the rental fee, but we have to get recognized somehow. So we'll communicate to make sure that we get recognized that as well.
Even if it's a reduction in fees, do we require that we get recognized? Good, great. Okay, item number 8 then, airports, there are no items. 9, new business, 2015 quarterly core financial report.
Okay, for you this afternoon to talk about some financial reports as it relates to calendar year 2015. I would like to stress that this is not the final year-end report. We have a very exhaustive process that we go through for closing the books, and we probably won't close and report to the state until May. But I do want to at least provide an update of how the end of the year is looking.
I have a question here. As far as timeline is concerned, how are we doing this year as far as getting prepared for that financial statement? I know other years we had to get extensions because there just was so much historical work that needed to be done.
The last couple of years we have not, they've all been filed by the state deadline. The last couple of years they've been filed electronically because that was a requirement. So we've not been having any major revision from when we file online and from when there was an audit. That was what was going on before. It wasn't so much an extension, but it was filed and not a thorough report, so then there were major revisions just before the auditor came out.
Okay.
But a couple of years ago, we got back on schedule to had it substantially complete or all complete, and the last one were very minor changes.
Okay.
Just only from the auditor.
Well, I just remember your first year here, you went 220 days without having a weekend day off, trying to get it all straight and turned in on time. And so we're past that now, right?
We're making incremental improvements every year.
That's great.
Even when it comes to the actual filing with the state. 2 years ago, we filed with about 2 hours remaining that day. Last year, we had a couple days.
Yes!
So the goal for this year will probably be like at least a week ahead of this.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Right. But I do want to stress that there are some very big numbers that we still don't have final resolution on. Some of those include like our ongoing negotiation over the K-Ply site and potentially viable parties. We know there's ongoing negotiations. We don't know what that final number. By the time we file in May, we should have some pretty good ideas. We also have an outside consultant that comes in and helps establish some environmental liabilities, which is a GASB requirement. That work is underway right now. That person will help us decide how much of a liability we need to put on the books based on, they do this every year. And so when they take this work on, then they look back and say, okay, well, that's what we said a year ago. What's happened? What's changed? And how we forecast that out into the future. So there are a couple still very major things that we don't have an answer to yet. But what I'm going to try and focus on today is operations, and that is pretty solid. Some of those non-operating things that we don't know that much about yet. So just agenda for my presentation this afternoon, I'm going to start with a little bit of a talk about log exports, then talk about some of the budget reductions we made once we realized that the log market was going to be decreasing, some total operating results, and as well as some line of business results. Where I'd like to start is, Commissioner McAleer was here, but for the benefit of the other two, a little over a year ago, we projected a budget for 2015, thinking we had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. But then as we got into the first part of 2015, we experienced a significant slowdown in the timber industry. And that caused all of us to panic just a little bit, go back to the drawing board and look at, where did we have opportunities to reduce expenditures and try and bring our budget back in line. So in quarter one, we looked at what was kind of be the worst case scenario for our budget. We projected that log exports could decrease clear down to 50 million board feet. What was a possibility. That was going to take a little over $1.3 million of revenue off our bottom line, or off our books. We were hoping to have at least a little bit of a net surplus at that point. We looked at some fairly aggressive expense reductions. And we're hoping under the worst case scenario to have a net surplus before depreciation of about $600,000. Reality turned out to be a little bit better, still not quite the optimistic view we had in 2014 when we were doing budgeting, but we did hit a little over 69 million board feet across our export dock. So our decrease from budget for log-related activity wasn't quite as bad as we thought. We made a little bit more money than we planned from the export market, and we still continued with some of our expense reductions, which I'll touch on the next page. Bottom line is the log-related activity generated a net surplus before depreciation of about $1.2 million. Now that's before any allocated expenses. That doesn't include business development, administration, payroll, marketing, maintenance, any of those costs. Another point I'd like to highlight there is 1.2, that's about 78% of our total bottom line. When you look at our organization, obviously we do more than log-related stuff, but log-related is where we're really making the majority of our income. That's that 1.277 represents 78% of our total bottom line. So as Carol mentioned before, and as we talked about this morning, the timber industry obviously is very important to us. Talking about the budget reductions briefly, I just have a list here. I won't go through all the individual ones, but early in the year we sat down and kind of came up with our crisis list of what are some of the areas we could cut expenditures. Everything from the process analyst that was hired was only brought on at halftime. The purchasing and grant contract specialist wasn't hired at all. We cut back on seasonal help. We cut back on some of our contributions to EDC and forest advocacy. In short, if you add up the adjusted and contingent adjustments, we cut about $360,000 out of our planned expenditures. Are there any questions on this before I move on? So turning to the organization as a whole,
Actually, John, if I may, just for their understanding, those positions were new positions that had been proposed, like process analyst and purchasing and contract specialist, and we determined not to hire them. It wasn't that someone was
No,
let
you
go.
still hired me, but I was hired on at halftime.
So I apologize, you're absolutely right. You were hired as the process analyst half-time,
Correct.
and so that didn't change, right, or did it? Slightly adjusted down?
Yeah, it would have been full-time, I only hired him.
Okay, all right, but then the purchase and contract person, it wasn't that someone was terminated.
No, that was.
That was my point. It was.
Right. We had planned on hiring someone to help us in the purchasing, grant compliance, grant application process. Personally, I feel that's a need that the port still has. As you've been exposed to in some of the RCW reviews, purchasing is a very complex process for the port. We do a lot of purchasing, we do a lot of contracting, we have a lot of grant applications, and I'm not saying we have room in the budget for it at this point, but it's still a need. And we've just tried to share the load of whether it's Chris or myself or Karen, all of us have tried to pick up those pieces where we can, but the need hasn't really gone away.
What is FM for seasonal help? What does FM mean?
Facilities maintenance.
Oh, okay.
So that had been planned correct me if I'm wrong, that was mainly John Wayne Marine, wasn't it?
No, that actually, facility maintenance seasonal help was port-wide.
Port-wide, okay. So summertime when you get some really good weather, there's a lot of projects we like to do, but some things just had to get put on hold just due to the budget conditions. Moving on. Looking at the organization as a whole, so what we have here is revenues, expenses, and then our surplus. So we budgeted, our optimistic budget was about $9.1 million. I think our high a couple of years ago was right at about $10 million. So while we're being optimistic, we realized we were in a little bit of a downturn. Actual revenues, organization-wide, came in at about $8.6 million, so we're about $500,000 below budget in operating revenues. Our operating expenses came in at about $183,000 below budget, leaving us a surplus for the year of $1.277 compared to a budget of $1.648. Now this does not include depreciation, which is right about $2 million. One way to look at this is roughly cash flow for the year, but that's not fully funding your depreciation to put cash aside to replace assets going down the road. So as someone in the financial world, I like fully funded depreciation every year. That means that we're making enough money from operations to be able to reinvest in our capital. We didn't quite make it there this year, but this isn't rising to the level that I begin to panic yet at all either. Income was a little less than expected. We managed some expenses the best we could, and we still managed to make some money during a much slower year than we planned.
And for the most part, what you're showing in that first thing about logs, our revenue drop was logs.
Yes.
That's where it pretty much all came from.
Yes.
But this slide does include all those expenses that we call allocated expenses.
Yeah.
Those just haven't been put into the lines of business yet, so
Correct.
just the logging page.
In round numbers, we have about $2 million of depreciation, and then we have about $2.7 million of what we call allocated costs, and that is your general administration, your overhead, your maintenance, your business development, all the things that are not directly part of a line of business, and I'll get into that here in one of the future slides. So excluding the 2.7 for allocated departments and the $2 million in depreciation, if we just take revenue minus direct expenses, so if I take my marine terminals, revenue less my marine terminal direct expenses, and then do that across basically our 5 lines of business. This is a comparison of how do those lines of businesses compare to each other. So you can see prior to, we had revenue of 8.6 million, and how did that basically lay out by line of business? Marine terminals has by far the largest share of our revenue source. Marine trades contributed some, log yard contributed some. Rental properties and airport, from previous years, this is definitely an improvement now that we are considering the properties at the airport that are within the airport master plan, part of the airport, which that's what the FAA says we should be doing, and a fair amount of effort was put into that endeavor as a process analyst. That was one of the first projects I took on. And then Marina has a fairly healthy margin as well. So talking about what happened, as I mentioned, timber is really where a lot of our money is, and we did have a slowdown this last year. Log exports decreased. They are cyclical, has been talked about several times. They're difficult to predict. This year at 70 million board feet, that was less than budget, but better than our worst case scenario. Looking into this current year, into 2016, I think we're looking at just a little bit better. Talking with some of our customers that did maybe 7 or 8 boats last year, they're talking maybe 9 this next year. So that's looking positive going into 2016. Marine terminal revenues decrease more than expenses. When we see a decrease in marine terminal revenue, unfortunately there's no direct offset to expenses. It's not like, well, your revenue went down, so your expenses went down. These are very capital intensive assets. When we look at our marine terminals, there's not a corresponding decrease. It's not like we have less man hours or something else where we can cut back. That's a capital asset that generates revenue over multiple years. And just because you don't have revenue some year doesn't mean your capital expense on an ongoing basis comes down. Log yard labor utilization, we try and balance that in-house as much as we can. We had some lower overtime this last year, and we pull some of our facilities maintenance guys over the log yard to flex when we can. So Mike, who's not even here to take credit for it, did a really great job of helping manage some of our labor costs. One of the bright spots this last year was log yard rafting activity. A lot of timber coming down out of Canada. So our rafting water-based activity was much higher than previous. Marine terminal tanker topside repair, kind of a double-edged sword there. We had one customer that decided to go to Asia for some of their repair that we'd been planning on doing here, but then we had an unplanned customer that showed up one day and said, oh, by the way, we need to tie up for a month. That did produce quite a bit of revenue. So marine terminal and log yard, their combined net impact took about a $500,000 decrease in revenue. And when I say, the reason I put marine terminal and log yard together is both of those are our timber related assets. So just, what happened in the world? Well, our export business went down. It cost us roughly $500,000 just from the slowdown.
Question,
Mhm.
if you would. Let's see. I had a question there about that. Well, I guess you'll get to this, but the barging revenue that increased, is that anywhere, is that illustrated within the operating revenues and somewhere? Because it seems like it's included in with, is it?
Log, so that's part of our log yard.
It's under a log yard. What is it specifically? I'd love to know. I mean, because before barging was almost zero, and so now it's increased, but how much has been that increase? What's that amount? Is there any way to see it in
I
this
don't know off the
report?
top of my head. I would actually have to go drill down into the department.
I mean, we've been hearing how it's increased and that's been of great value. I'm just wondering if we could quantify that.
It will be in the log yard services. I just
Okay.
don't know. I think it's I don't know if it's gonna be, I actually don't know how we classify it, whether it's water or land, because basically is it,
It's the water base.
okay, then it'll be the water, because it's dumped into the water and we go down with the wood terminals and pick it up, so it'll be, so we'll have to look, because then they also do some stuff on land for staging, so
Okay,
it's a combination of the two.
okay. But we haven't defined how much revenue is increased from that particular activity.
Not specific to that activity. We've seen two increases at the log yard, although the second one is a little more into 2016. The Monroe LLC log yard lease terminated, and he moved off. Basically, granted, Monroe is still doing nearly the same volume of business. He's just doing it in partnership with Alcan now down in the log yard where we're handling it. So while we lost out on the lease revenue, from the land lease, it's now part of our log yard revenue with increased services down there. At the same time that's increased, we've also seen the increase in the rafting market. And both coming out of Canada and headed into Puget Sound. It's kind of a two-way street there.
So I'd be curious to know there, are we making, if it's about the same amount of volume that he's processing through, and it was where we were getting lease revenue, but now we're getting log yard revenue, which one
It
is
won't
more?
have the same profit margin, because when it was a land lease, we get very little cost off, so offset it when it's in the log yard, it's more labor intensive. So it's we're providing log yard services where before it was a piece of property where we're getting rental revenue on, and that has a higher margin than when we're providing labor to provide services.
Go ahead.
Couple questions. Log yard related, do we have, is there any log yard that's not export related? Or is all our yard?
No, we have domestic, where they'll go through the log yard as well. Some of the stuff that's getting put onto barges, it goes into Puget Sound. It can very well be domestic market timber. So it's not limited to export only.
Okay, how do you differentiate that between the stuff that's going marine terminal destined and, or do you track that different?
We do, because we have to pay a different excise tax. There's a favorable excise tax if it's going to export. So we separate out our revenue that is related with export of logs from the others. So we don't typically pull reports that way, but we could do some analysis to get to it.
Okay.
If I'm thinking through this correctly, which is it seems to me that if Grant Monroe has the same amount of volume, whether he was leasing property from us at the Cape Life facility compared to the log yard, and now he doesn't have the labor expense, and now we have the labor expense, why wouldn't our revenues go up dramatically. Because we're now not only supplying the land
No,
at
we're
the
not.
log yard, well, storing it, but we're also supplying the labor. So it seems to me we would be getting more revenue.
Our revenue, we have a different type of revenue that we are getting. Before we
Right.
had rental revenue,
Right.
now we have log yard
Right,
services
I understand that.
revenue.
Right,
For the, we already had our, there is a net benefit, there's a net that we get off of that. We didn't separately calculate that net. If that's what you're going to, you want to compare what is the net that we were getting off of rental property versus what is the net now that he is using our log yard. We have not calculated that net. Our guys don't track their time when they're working
yeah.
in the log yard for whether this was work that, you know, we're doing now because Monroe doesn't have his land lease.
And
It might be an
depends on-
interesting data point though for us as we compare from a customer's perspective, if they lease land from us and compared, and if he's doing the same amount of volume, I just,
Now, when I say he's doing the same amount of volume, this is based on my personal conversations with Brent.
okay,
Now, he is now working in partnership with Alcan, and from the port's perspective, Alcan is our customer at the log yard. We don't have any dealings directly with Grant anymore, so his volume is now merged into the Alcan volume. So I can't go down to the log yard and say, oh, you know, that's Monroe Wood, that's,
Right.
you know, nor do we have, you know, part of my analysis could be, well, how much volume did he move through the land lease? Well, that was his business, not ours. It's, I don't have historical records to go back to say, you know, you moved 5 million board feet or 12 million board feet. I have apples and golf clubs.
haha. I like that one too. But don't we have board feet though? If he's exporting, we've got the wharfage.
Through Alcan.
Through Alcan.
Yeah,
But
but
that-
previously it was through Grant Monroe. And
Correct.
so it just would be, I've always kind of wondered, how do our log rates compare to other options out there? And so I thought this might be a nice, easy way to,
Because what, what you're getting at is the idea is now a way better deal for him than before. Like I should have given up my lease 5 years ago and just done it on port property because I've cut my expenses.
It's, I would say what's, the reason the consolidation happened is because it was very hard for the export companies to individually fill a cargo vessel.
right,
They couldn't
right,
sell that much, but if they went in together, they could fill
right.
it. So part of it's impacted by how much demand there is for export work and how much individual control you want and how much of your own deal you can make versus now you combine with another company, what deal do they make, how are you sharing in that. So to look at it from the individual business person, is it better for them or not, that's very hard for us to know. We could try to track what's more advantageous to us. Do we want to rent land so that they have a staging area of what they're doing, or do we want them to put those services through the log yard? One, we have to have enough space for the log yard. We have to have the staffing for the log yard. We had the staffing to absorb the work because the log yard, the log export and other timber related activity is down. If it was a really hot market, we would have had a higher staff in order to provide those services. So we happen to benefit at this point in time that we could use our current staff because the market was in a lull. So it didn't cost us any more in labor, that we had that labor anyways. They just weren't doing other things. They switched to doing these services. But at other times, if it was a really high volume already, in order to take out that extra service for a customer, we probably would have had a staff done.
Sure.
So,
I get, my point is understanding the rates. And are we charging the right amount? Are we in that target zone where it makes sense? And it's kind of even whether they lease property for us or they use our services? Where, I was just curious to understand how we compare with other opportunities that our customers have.
Right.
I think it'd be good information to have, but I'm not suggesting we do 20 hours of work to figure it out either.
And then you run into some other complicating factors like the debarker. The debarking equipment that's still over on the Cape Light site was having some significant operational issues. Where when Mr. Monroe was able to move his volume down to the log yard, they have a much newer, more efficient machine down there. That was a great benefit to his business. So there's more. I understand exactly what you're looking for, and I'll keep that in mind.
You might just ask him.
I can't speak for him. I believe the comments I've heard from him are on the lines of there was no significant financial advantage for him to go down to the log yard. It was more of a strategic advantage. It's now he's in there in partnership with a partner, and they can build volume together and better serve the customers.
When they use the log services, the time the logs sit until they get exported, is it just a flat cost, or do they get charged a rate?
There is, I believe the fee is based on 60 days, it might be 90 days, but it was a number of days that typically they needed to be staged in order to be ready for export. If they go past that amount of time, then there's an additional fee that's charged. There's a certain amount that is set there just to be able to move it through.
I think that's what, I'm getting at is how long does that wood sit there? And should it be after 30 days they get charged, or should we be saying they don't have to pay any storage fee, I guess is what it would be, because it's not a lease, any storage fee for, is this 60 days,
the storage fee is worked into the upfront fee of just handling the wood, and it gets them X amount of storage time. Once they go past that time, then they get charged
I
a monthly
understand.
rate.
I'm just wondering
And
if
it was
the structure that we
it
have
moving.
set, is that maximizing our revenues without losing clients and customers? Anyway, it was just, it would be nice information for the staff to know, to have.
Well, I know
Okay.
Mike works a lot on being in touch with the other log yards and the private log yards we compete with to be competitive.
Okay.
My impression is it's not been an issue this last year. And at 70 million board feet across the export dock, they were getting ships in often enough that no one was complaining about having to pay the storage fee, because I think there were very few times that occurred, just because there was enough turn. I think where that becomes a problem is if we have a significant slowdown. If we go back to one of those 50 million board feet a year or something less, well, then people are going to be sitting on the wood longer, and that could become an issue in the future. I think we're okay right now, but it's certainly something to stay aware of.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay, then turning to the marine trades and the marinas for a couple minutes. We had some seasonality factors. In general, for the past year, we've had some pretty darn good weather. We didn't have the major storms. We've had a very positive year from the boaters' perspective, had some good fishing seasons. So both the marine trades and the marinas both saw upticks in revenue. Both of them were, both the trades area and both the marinas were all ahead of budget in terms of revenues. There is some debate at the Port Angeles Boat Haven Boat Haven as to how much of our occupancy increase was as a direct result of the rate rollback. Some people will probably be testifying before you in a week that they think that's the reason we got more. I would point out that this year in 2016, we've increased our rates and we've continued to see our occupancy increase.
Did, when you did the rate rollback, did the increased occupancy cover the rollback?
Yes, initially the rates were rolled back, and so there was, what it was saying, that there was some increase, but there's multiple factors going on. It's a better fishing season, different things like that can affect the amount of occupancy that is in the,
But I thought when we rolled the rates back in 2014, that the increased occupancy didn't overcome that
The
rollback.
decrease in.
oh, right,
Yeah.
we lost revenue.
Yeah.
Okay,
Is that
so
your question?
regardless,
Yeah, that's
regardless
That's
of
the question, yeah. We
the,
lost revenue.
so we lost revenue over the rollback,
Mhm.
regardless of whether it was
Correct.
good or bad weather or whatever.
I think we lost about half. So it increased enough for what we would have lost in the rollback, and I don't remember exactly, I want to say it was going to be around $100,000, and instead we were done around $50,000.
Okay.
But in general, Port Angeles Boat Haven, John Wayne Marina, and the Marine Trades area all had a good year. All of them had revenues that exceeded the budget numbers. Out at the airport, we continue to suffer from slow business out there. Our hangar rentals remain slightly lower, I think is an understatement. We're just facing a tough market out there. I personally rent a hangar out there, and I look at the shed hangars directly in front of me, and there must be 20 hangars there, the open ones, and I think Wright Brothers is using 3 of those. It's just general aviation that is struggling at the moment. Hopefully we'll do some things that will increase that, but it continues to be an area where we struggle. When we budgeted for 2015, we did not plan for any commercial air service. We thought that was going to be the home run for 2016, which didn't happen as planned. We did I think, strategically spend some good money, though, trying to figure out how we can improve out at the airport. We did a $48,000 market demand study. That's the information we are directly sharing with some of the potential airlines that we're trying to recruit to our area. We offered up $55,000 for marketing the new air service. We worked with SeaTac to get some landing fee waivers. We offered to waive our landing fees here. We also had an unknown cost for TSA or capital improvements. That was the time that a number of things came together, which they didn't. We plan to, obviously, as you're aware, start service in March or in this current month, but the carrier withdrew, stating that they had a pilot shortage. I personally see this as, I think that's maybe might have a silver lining to it. As Seaport Airlines goes through bankruptcy, if I'm their CEO, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going through reorganization. Where do I want service when I come out of reorganization? We're going to be the profitable routes. Where is it that I can make a go of it? And I'm hoping that before too long we'll hear from them that, the Port Angeles SeaTac route might be a little more favorable than some of the other areas where they were serving.
John, do we have any more, I see unknown costs for TSA or capital improvements. I know there are a lot of potential costs with the fencing, security, a firefighting vehicle. Have we been able to determine a composite range? No.
It's with everything on hold.
Okay.
In my understanding, some of that changes depending on what type of.
Aircraft?
Yeah,
Mhm,
so we're waiting for that.
mhm, okay. But it's hundreds of thousands.
Yes, it could be, and it could be, what is it? The smaller aircrafts will not require as much as the larger ones.
Also, I want to add that the Port of Seattle had offered one of their older firefighting trucks that was surplus to us, that we would receive that at no cost. So I don't know if we want to get it and park it.
I hope to start having to explore ideas like that a couple months from now. We
Okay.
can get either some of the new airlines we're talking to, or maybe Seaport if they come out of reorganization and look like a viable partner. I hope this becomes a problem in a couple months.
For what it's worth on the airport thing, I don't know if this has been looked at because I haven't met with Jerry yet. I'm going to actually meet with him this week. But I watched a report on TV about the aircraft painters that are just dying to find places to set up paint booths because they got more planes to paint and nowhere to paint them. Is that been something they,
It came up recently and will be, I think it's on the, I love that, I have to look back at it.
Fourth, I think it is. The fourth.
We're looking at aviation
Yes.
incentives?
A
Okay.
week from today.
Yeah, it's we met with a small committee and one of the things that came up was that, and they were actually eyeing, whether we would want to target someone to bring to the Westport building for that. The old 1010 building.
Oh, okay,
That
that
Westport
one,
was, and I'm
yeah.
sorry, I just realized, why would they come down here now?
like, unless it's a seaplane, I'm thinking that's a
The 1010
problem.
building at the airport industrial park where Westport used to have a cabin.
Oh, okay.
For a portion of that building? Oh, we can go over it later.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
We're looking at multiple, whether it's small engine repair, avionics, paint shop. We're in the process right now of exploring, who's providing the service currently, who can we approach to move here. It's been very helpful. Mel Rubin's behind me here. He's been instrumental in bringing some really good ideas forward through the Pilots Association. So that's something we hope to be talking about quite a bit here, quite a bit more in the near future. Turning to rental properties and airport rental properties. Revenue is lower than optimistic budget. That's a nice way to put it. We thought we were going to come into this year with Westport staying all year and potentially getting a market increase in the year. As it turns out, they're probably going to be leaving and vacating the building more in the October timeframe. So last year we were a little over optimistic in our budget. Had some key leases that we thought were going to be realized that didn't happen. And then just a number of complex negotiations, just delaying rate increases. Within the rental properties and airport rental budget, we had a reclassification for FAA grant compliance, moved roughly $1 million from rental property to airport rental property. There's no net effect to the bottom line, but this is recognizing the fact that we have about $1 million worth of year of revenue coming out of the airport area. And so we need to recognize that as airport revenue. So we created a new department. Department number 33 is airport rental properties, and moved that all out of rental property into that new department. Have some vacancies in that area. So a lot of the expenses we've had out there are just maintaining some vacant buildings and doing some maintenance. Vacant buildings are obviously never a good thing. We'd like to be producing revenue when we can, but it's also provided us some opportunities to go in and do some much needed maintenance. So when you look at our overall budget for the year, our overall budget report, you'll see that maintenance supplies overall were actually over budget. And I would attribute some of that to just the fact that we had some empty buildings we could actually get into to do some of the things we needed to do.
So now all of our rental properties over there are all considered airport rental properties now?
Yes.
That's all just airport now?
Yes, anything that is south of West 18th Street, anything in the airport industrial, I call it airport industrial park, and that's defined by the FAA master plan that has the actual map of the airport with a circle drawn around it that says anything within this area is considered part of the airport layout plan.
Okay.
So I want to understand how we've divided up these pieces. We have the airport industrial park, which is the composite manufacturing campus
Correct.
as well. And then we have the airport. Does that include like the M&R lease?
Yes.
Okay, land lease. And then we have rental properties which are outside, anything, would that include, say, the Dockside Grill lease at the John Wayne Marina?
At the John Wayne Marina, or
Well, the John Wayne Marina, we decided to classify that as part of
the John Wayne Marina?
Part of
Okay,
Marina.
which totally makes sense. It's just good
Where
to,
Castaways,
where
we
does it go?
decided not to because it wasn't as dependent. There's a number of restaurants that are non-marina related.
okay,
so
okay.
other
There's very
So-
little pure rental
Rental
property
properties.
now.
Pretty much just the south side of Marine Drive, is that?
If, I think for the most part, yes, and I think as we look to developing the Marine Trades Industrial Park and how we define
Yeah.
what's along Marine Drive, we're starting to be designating it more as being supportive of marine trade. At some point, we'll probably move that into the marine trades in the future.
Okay. It'd be good at some point to have for the commissioners, so when we look at these, a map of what's allocated. Yeah.
Turning to general administration for 2015, as I was just claiming, maintenance expenses were over budget. Timing and types of expenses are difficult to predict a year or a year and a half ahead of time. We did have a couple minor emergent issues down at our mech shop. They had some lighting issues and some other issues that had to be addressed. And as we alluded to earlier, one of the facility's seasonal positions wasn't filled due to the expense reduction plan. Business development was significantly over budget. This was despite the fact that there were a number of budget reductions enacted. We canceled the planned China trip, some of our forest advocacy, we reduced our EDC contribution. So while those were reductions, we ended up spending quite a bit more for the economic development services for CRTC. So they were over budget for the year, almost completely due to CRTC involvement. Within pure administration, our expenses were under budget. Purchasing grant specialist wasn't hired. My position originally was cut to half-time, and we did not implement any of the planned merit increase in the salary areas. Turning briefly to non-operating, this is where I started saying there's still a lot of, not necessarily unknowns here, but a lot of things that are still up in the air that are being considered right now. In general, under non-operating, KPLI dominates the non-operating activities. Last year alone, we had well over $7 million worth of environmental remediation and cleanup. We're still trying to figure out how much we're going to get recovered of that from potentially liable partners versus the insurance company versus ecology grants. There's a number of balls up in the air there. Insurance recoveries, we have gotten some recoveries from insurance companies, but it's getting kind of complex because the insurance companies should be making us whole, and any recovery that comes from a potentially liable party should probably end up going back to the insurance company. But there's ongoing negotiations because no one wants to pay us millions of dollars, and so we're having to fight for everything we're getting. On the capital side of non-operations, we have multiple grants, T1 development, grants through the FAA out at the airport, and some port security grants that we're collecting all the receipts, submitting everything, and making sure we have everything appropriately submitted for grant reimbursement. And there's just a lot of reconciliation work that goes into that. Property taxes were right on budget. And finally, we did save a few $100,000. Karen did some great work refinancing our 2006 bond. 2006 is what we used to rebuild half of the Port Angeles Boat Haven. And we were able to take advantage of some very favorable rates. And so we basically refunded what was due on the 2006 bond, took out a new one at a much lower rate. Saved us over $300,000 over the remaining life, which is about 10 years to go. And that's all I have for the fourth quarter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so that was the 2015 Q4 financial report under new business. Under old business, EDC contract addendum revisions.
Okay, so we've been before the commission a couple of times on trying to work out the best language in working with the EDC for some goals that are important to the court. So on March 11th, we initially talked with the commission, got some ideas, had a draft addendum put together, then on March 14th, we reviewed that draft addendum and talked about it again and made a few more revisions. Then there was the EDC meeting, and Commissioner Burke was able to talk with the executive team at the EDC, and they came up with a few revisions. So what you had in your packet, we're not changing any part of the agreement that was submitted from the EDC that follows what they put together with the county, so it's just our court addendum. And you have a red line version in your packet for the changes that are the result of the meeting Commissioner Burke had with the EDC, and then some follow-up discussion between myself, Bill Greenwood, and Commissioner Burke again. So if you could take a look at those revisions and let me know if we might be at the final, or if this could be adopted by the court, and then my understanding, I did send this to Mr. Greenwood at the EDC, and he indicated he felt that this wording, especially on section 5, the joint initiative, there was quite a bit of going back and forth on industrial property inventory, and I think they're in a better position of understanding what we were looking for, and that it is something that is doable, that we can work towards, and so that's what probably some of the language was going back and forth a number of times.
Do you have any comments?
No,
Commissioner Burke?
I think under the joint initiatives, that was, once I understood what we were trying to get, and then I was able to explain, we were all on the same page with that, and I think they're actually excited about moving forward with that as well, because it's something that also the city and the county are very much looking forward to as well.
And I know our property manager, Tanya Kerr, met with Jennifer Lindsay of the EDC and went through that Zoom Prospector software that we had looked at that provides us a tool to list our own properties, and the EDC could list properties of their membership that it doesn't need to be listed with the broker, but we could get listings there, as well as access to demographic data. What we have not, worked out is who would fund that software, whether that's something the court would fund, the EDC would fund, whether we fund it jointly. But we're just in the early discussions of, talking through the software and its benefit, and it can be tied to the GIS database of the city and things like that.
Well, that's an important component for me, and as I see us moving forward, knowing what the needs are and the availability of industrial property from Forks through Sequim is very important, especially as entities like the CRTC look forward to. We have all these people coming in looking for large businesses, or at least facilities where we can manufacture CRTC things. It's very valuable to have that information, so I'm glad that EDC sees the value of this, and I do not think that this is a port-only job to do. Of course, we need to provide information regarding port properties, but this really needs to be a county-wide thing, and so I think that the software needed for the program should come out of their kind of general budget, because it is a county-wide involvement, so it shouldn't be apportioned out to different entities, to pay for that. That should just come out of their budget, their operating funds. But I have looked at this carefully. We've revised it quite a number of times, and I don't have any other changes to make to it.
I don't have changes, but I do have a tangential comment that we are supporting the SBDC, Kevin Holt, with his location here. That's a total of $30,000 worth of support in 2016 in this budget, and which included, if I recall, $7,000 of in-kind support with office space, and so $23,000 in cash. that is a service that is supporting all of our county and Port Townsend and Jefferson County. And as far as I know, no other municipal or special district has supported SBDC to make sure they are located here in this county or on the Olympic Peninsula, because they were going to be eliminated entirely. And so this port stepped up and paid for that. The intent was everyone should put some money into that. No one else did, so we put $30,000 into it for year one. We want to make sure that as budgets come around this next year, that we are not left holding the bag, and the choice is either pay Port Angeles or the SBDC office will leave the Olympic Peninsula.
That would be very sad to see happen, and that's specifically why we put them here in this building, because we want them located in the middle of our county so that we receive the best benefit for it. And I think it's very important to continue with that. I know that Kevin has been working with Rod Fleck out in Forks, and Forks is giving him 2 days a month, 2 Wednesdays a month of office space just out there in Forks for him to be out there. And he's given a number of presentations to the chamber out there to help grow those businesses out there. But it is vitally important. If we can get funds from other entities,
Right.
fine. But for him to be housed and centered right here in Port Angeles is very important. Otherwise, we lose him either to Jefferson County or he entirely goes away, which would be
He's,
very sad.
I think he's in Jefferson County 1 day a week, maybe 2, in Port Townsend. 2 days,
Tuesday and Thursday. I
okay,
have to go look at his name.
yeah.
Yep, I know that.
But I think he offers an incredible value at a really low amount to our counties, but someone's got to take this issue and ensure that that funding occurs and is in the budget of the cities, the counties, and maybe even the PUD, the Peninsula College, et cetera, that everybody's putting some money into it, because next year I could see us just offering lease space because we put $23,000 of cash in this year.
I can talk with Kevin to see what his outreach efforts are being planned for when he's working in these different areas.
Because I really think,
last year it came at the very end,
Right.
and it was difficult. but
Right.
he's got
I'll
to
see where
earn his own dinner. I mean, I don't think that's our job.
Right.
He needs to find funding sources.
But when there is a group that comes together about economic development, and it's lots of different municipalities, that is the EDC. So I would think that that message might be something that you want to share with the EDC board, that yes, we bit the bullet in 2016, but that will not happen in our next budget.
Yeah, I mean, he should be going to the EDC and this,
Yeah.
and I would be willing to support him, but I'm not gonna carry his water.
Certainly, yeah. But I mean, sharing that message, I think at the EDC is the location to do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and maybe it's better that he be up there, I don't know. I
No,
mean,
I think it's, well, anyway.
Yep,
Yeah.
I think it's just that he needs to approach multiple entities, and where we have a port representation on the EDC, then that helps us to be supportive for the EDC to contribute something to SBDC. But whether it's the college, the PD, the cities, the county, there's multiple sources that the SBDC needs to be considering. And we can ask as part of our, him to come and also do a quarterly report.
Okay. Okay, I just thought of that as we were going through this. Thank you. So, do we have a motion?
I'd make a motion that we approve the contract with the Economic Development Corporation of Clallam County, in addition to the addendum to the agreement between the EDC and the Port of Port Angeles dated March 22nd, 2016.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
My discussion is that I want it to be clear to EDC, and as we approve this, that we want input on that contract next year as it's being developed, if they're going to work from a template contract.
Yeah, my anticipation is that we would be working together on developing a work plan in concert with them, and that work plan would then be attached as an addendum to the templated contract.
And just to share, there was a work plan or action plan created last year. I don't know what happened to it.
Yeah,
It was just, it was a basic document that was provided as a draft. They do have that.
yeah, well, I want to make sure that we're involved in on it earlier than just at the time of the contract.
And, you know, we really should be getting this to us. I mean, if the contract is for the year, the calendar year, they really should be getting us this contract in December. November, certainly. But it shouldn't be delivered to us in January, February, or March. They need to pre-plan.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we'll have to, I'm unclear a little bit on what our expectations are. Are we using our money to get services, or are we using our money to support what they're doing? Because those are two very different things. And how I thought, my understanding of it is that we're doing it in support of what they're doing, and we're involved in shaping that from an earlier standpoint, not at the contract time standpoint.
What input do I have? I think that our money is contributing to the overall support of it, but we are asking for some specific deliverables for the port, but that our money is not paying just for those specific deliverables.
Yeah, and what I'm hoping for this year is we'll have those deliverables part of their work plan from the beginning instead of having to list them out, you know, so it's more cohesive.
Okay. All right, if there's no further discussion, there's a motion on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
All right,
Aye. And the motion carries unanimously. All right, good to have that behind us.
Yes.
so please let me know, other commissioners, if there is things, as things come up in your mind that you would like the EDC to target or to take on, that I can bring them to them earlier than later, so we can get them not at the last minute.
At this point, I'd be happy if they just fulfill. Will we have any addendum for this year?
I think that would be a good thing.
Okay, moving on. 10B, CRTC change order.
All right, last item. So the Composite Recycling Technology Center, a little bit of background, that project was bid out last November. Commission approved the contract with the low bid, Rogers Incorporated, for $4,052,000 plus applicable Washington State sales tax. They mobilized to the site and began construction shortly after the first of the year. Currently, they are approximately 50% complete with the project. During the course of the project, there have been a number of small alterations to either the existing building or slight changes to the plans. Throughout the course of the project, we have had 2 change orders to date. Those have been approved by the interim executive director and signed off and then incorporated into the contract. We're at a point now where change order 3 will exceed the interim executive director's authority. So here we are before you, the commissioners, to approve change order number 3. Change order number 3 includes a number of items. There's, you can see it broken down in your packet under the analysis section. There's an addition of louvers. There's modifications to the dust collection system, and what that does is really add in a number of explosion-proof devices. This is part of kind of a recent code change to the fire protection code. There's door hardware changes to just the regular doors, and also the overhead doors, and then some changing to the framing within the building. So the typical procedure for these change orders has been for the general contractor, Rogers, to prepare a change order proposal. They submit that to the architect for review. They review and see if what they're proposing makes sense, and if the costs are in line with what they're used to seeing. They then approve that and send it on to the port, and then the port can approve or bring it in front of the commission, in this case, for approval before it gets incorporated into the contract. And at that point, they're authorized to complete the work. Total fiscal impact of the project. Outside funding incorporates $4 million of the funding. There's $2 million from a United States Economic Development Administration grant. There's $1 million from Washington State Clean Energy Fund and $1 million from the Collin County Opportunity Fund. And then there's also $300,000 allocated in the port's capital budget. So that $300,000 is for services that are outside the grant scope, which include things like consultant services and inspections, and also any construction costs that go beyond $4 million is covered by the port. Additionally here, as you see, most everything says plus applicable Washington State sales tax. That was purposely because when we signed the contract, that was the language we used. It was really because there's a nuance that we have from the Department of Revenue, we have a sales tax deferral certificate, and it's really detailed, and certain things are included and certain things aren't. So we go through that, and approximately 100% of the equipment infrastructure is covered, and about 71% of the structure infrastructure is covered. So we had to pay about 25% of the total of sales tax that we typically have to pay. So the total for change order 3 is $30,043.10. Staff recommends the commission authorize the interim executive director to execute change order 3 with Rogers Incorporated in the amount of $30,043.10 plus applicable Washington State sales tax. This will bring the total of the contract to $4,102,347.16 plus the Washington State sales tax. Any questions or comments from the commissioners?
Of the $300,000 allocated from our budget, how much of that has been used or identified that we'd have to use since there's some restrictions on our grants?
Right. So $4 million for the grants. The portions that are hitting the $300,000 will be our consulting design fees. They're not a lot of design, but kind of construction management, reviewing submittal packages and whatnot. That's probably in the $60,000, $70,000 range of that $300,000, and then inspection is around $30,000, so that'll take about $100,000 out of that, and then the rest will be construction costs, and some of that is upgrading the transformer. I want to say that was, I can't remember how much that was, $25,000 or so. So we're going to be right up there near that $4.3 million when we're all said and done. Going back to when we approved the contract, there was actually a number of alternates that we selected, and I think I made the presentation that time. We're not having much room for error here as far as the budget's concerned, but it was at that time it was decided by the commission that they wanted to proceed anyways with all alternatives. So we do have some flexible project funds that we can offset, so if we do go beyond that $4.3 million, we do have funds in the capital budget that could cover it.
Some of those alternatives that were selected included making the power generation sources more sustainable.
Right. Solar panels, solar power, and additional infrastructure for expansion of that in the future. Solar thermal hot water system. There was a polish for the concrete floors for making them more, make them look nicer and make them last longer. And I think that was it. I think that was the 4 alternatives.
Any other
Questions or comments?
So the dust collection modifications, is that a de-static?
I'm not an expert. I do have a thought. We might get some questions on that one, so I have some printouts that I could maybe give you some more information.
If it's too...
No, it's mainly for explosion, to add explosion-proof devices to the dust collector. So when we went and designed, the mechanical engineer designed the dust collection system, it pretty much mirrored what Peninsula College was using at the Skills Center, but there's been an update to the standards that have become code since then, and it was without their understanding. So they're adding items here that could have been added before, they just weren't aware that they become standard, or become code now, and not just a standard. And it has a lot to do with the makeup of the dust. You know, there's a lot of wood in the wood dust that's got the potential for explosion. So these items will, it's really a life safety thing at the end of the day, because we're kind of on the border of whether or not we need it. When we start looking at a life safety issue for the addition of that, those funds, it really, you wouldn't want to err on the other side, I think.
And the door hardware changes, it's not that the hardware wasn't included, or is this more heavy duty, or this?
Yeah, there was some additional switches and some security that allowed, you know, they want to make sure that students can open the overhead doors, so putting key locks that they had to be key operated to use them was something that we thought was a good idea.
Okay,
Well, I'd make a motion that we approve change order number 3 in the amount of $30,043.10 plus applicable Washington State sales tax.
I have to say it, you have to say it.
Second.
okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Actually, if I could interrupt, need a motion to be authorized the interim director to enter into agreement. Motion said you would approve it.
Oh, okay, yes. Motion is that we'd authorize the executive director to approve change order number 3. Execute change order number 3 in the amount of $30,043.10 plus applicable Washington State sales tax.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Can you give us an aye?
Aye, sorry.
And the motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
I was just so excited about checking it off my list.
Didn't know if I missed it. All right, so now to item number 11, public comment session.
I have no voice right now.
Otherwise you would? Right. Okay, and hearing none, items not on the agenda. Next regular meeting is scheduled for April 11th, 2016. And not one, April 4th?
We do have a special meeting
Okay.
in April.
And so, and then also a special meeting scheduled April 4th. And now we are going to move into executive session. Commission will now move into executive session to discuss 4 items concerning the purchase of real estate. The estimated time for executive session is 45 minutes. It is now 2:45, so we will come back out of executive session at approximately 3:30. And the commission is not expected to take final action following the executive session.
And I apologize, I highlighted the wrong ones about the lease of Port property. So I apologize for that.
Okay, so 4 items concerning the lease of port property. We're not going to buy 4 pieces of property. I was interested in that.
Yeah, I was hoping you did.
Yeah, really? Okay, so I will move the commission into executive session.
Item Roman numeral 5B. 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th line down, Mr. Lenberry's name was incorrectly spelled. It's an A instead of an E in there. And then 2 lines down from that. Mr. Lenberry commented several times that he did not keep the lease rather than leave the lease. That's the only change on that one. Then the March 14th Commission meeting minutes on page 2, at the top under C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th line down. It says annual port, the word should be revenue rather than income. Annual port revenue is $24,000 plus leasehold excise tax instead of before leasehold excise tax. And on page 3, Roman numeral 13, items not on the agenda, item B, the second sentence, which begins on the second line, Ms. Goshen stated, and then cross out the words, "The proposed lease is exempt from public disclosure until it is approved by the commission and," so that the sentence will then read, Ms. Goshen stated that she will discuss it with the court attorneys Chris Ripple and Simon Barnhart to determine the best way to accommodate the request. On the special commission meeting minutes of March 21st, first page, Roman numeral 6, add the words where it says discussion, the consensus was to add an RCW and policy requirements section to the IFC, paren item for consideration, and then add the words, and develop an operating policy handbook in the future. And with those revisions, I will move approval of those minutes.
Okay, I believe there were 7 revisions. And we have a motion. Do we have a second? Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Early public comment session.
Carol Johnson, Executive Director of the North Olympic Timber Action Committee here in Port Angeles. I just want to give a brief update about what happened at the Timber Advisory meeting on Friday. Connie was there. It lasted nearly 5 long hours. And this was the 4th meeting. I think it's been the most productive. Before that, there's been a lot of discourse on fair treatment and all kinds of bizarre things. But I'm going to, Chris, could you pass one to Karen, Sylvia, and the 3 commissioners. The resolution that the commissioners went through in order to form this committee. And 2 and 3 are really the crux of what the committee is tasked with. And I just thought it would be interesting, if you haven't seen it, to read it. It was videotaped. This one would be a good one to go back and watch because the DNR made several presentations, and it was their DNR structure and how they pay for things and where they get their money. The most important was the sustainable harvest calculation and the arrearage. That was very important information. And then there were Rod Flex, City of Forks attorney. Toby Thaler is the environmental attorney from Seattle representing Olympic Forest Coalition. He had a presentation on arrearage, so did Rod, and then Ann Forrest Burns. The other gentleman from the Forest Law Center did not attend, so his presentation wasn't there. But this gives you some idea of what we're really discussing. And this morning in your work session, you talked about the value of the ships that come in and the cargo and that sort of thing. Even though DNR timber is not exported, they are the part of the equation. The public lands are the ones that supply the mills and are supposed to help make up the total volume of timber supply with the 3 ownerships, federal, state, and private. So anyway, this particular meeting was
Really, 3 notes of highlight. We on the Terminal 1 redevelopment. We did cut a check to Legacy Contracting for $817,000. That's we have about 32% left on that contract, or about 1 million. And then on the T1 and T3 engineering, we cut a check to Jones Strategic for about $12,000, and we got about 53% left on that. And the last one is related to the T1, T3 engineering. That was Berger Abraham, and we've got about 53% left on that one. About 89,000 left on that engineering. Everything else was mostly just operational and looked good. And I sat down with John, and the system in place for vouchers is very robust and well done.
I'd like to make one clarification. I think Jones Strategic was the ED.
The ED recruitment fee. Yes.
Sorry, all my micro writing there.
Yep.
Okay. we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And the motion carries unanimously. Okay. And so the minutes.
So, Madam Chair, I have the following revisions for minutes, and then I'll make a motion. On March 11th, the special commission meeting minutes on page 2. The first whole sentence to read, emphasis was placed on the need for improvement because once the terminals go into disrepair, they are financially improbable to replace. Very possible.
Okay.
On the March 14th commission work session minutes, under
Particularly informative. I think it will help you form some ideas and about what is going on and where we have issues. The only thing I will say is that basically the members of the environmental community sort of came in not with the idea of performing items 2 and 3 in the resolution, but moreover protecting their position. And so pay particular attention to some of the conversations that go back and forth, because the reality is there is a specific chore to take place, and I don't think they're really participating in that part of it, and they're taking up a lot of extra time. But this particular meeting will give you a good format about what is important here in the process that the commissioners have set forth. And one last comment, not on the Timber Advisory Council, but when you're speaking as an audience member, and today I am photoing for Stephanie, but some do not have voices that carry well. And if you're a member of the audience, it's very hard sometimes to hear what some people are saying. You get the context of what you're talking about, but you only heard maybe part of the conversation. So it would be helpful for the recorder and for the citizens in the audience to speak up so that your voice carries and we can hear what you're talking about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Carol, can you share with us whose voice doesn't carry well?
I was sitting over here when I was doing the minute revision.
Okay.
I've been trying to have them.
Well, you probably know it's typically not you, Colleen.
Probably not.
Not you, Connie. Up a little.
Do I have?
And yes,
Yes, okay.
definitely. And even John, a little bit. When you're in that circle, what happens to come out, or even up here, when you're speaking forward, it's easier to hear. But if you're at the table, you don't hear the back of people. The voice, the sound goes out the other way. And so sometimes you're missing things, and I do listen, and I'm sure
So I'm going to call this meeting to order.
105.
105, sorry, yep, that too. And Commissioner Burke, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And our next item, thank you for coming, a few folks that are out there, appreciate the attendance. We had a lengthy work session, got over about 50 minutes ago, so ready to start piling through this meeting. And we'll start with the consent agenda.
Madam Chair, I'd like to have the minutes of March 11th, March 21st, and March 14th, sorry. The 11th, the 14th, and the 21st, pulled from the consent agenda.
And the work session? 4 of them. So all 4?
There were changes on the first one also.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I think I got it now. Okay, you want to pull those? Yes. And do you have a motion?
So, Madam Chair, I'll move that the consent agenda be approved. We're going to do minutes first.
Either way, we can approve just the vouchers if you'd like, and then go through the minutes. Do you have any comments?
Is there a motion?
Yes, I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I will second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Just on the vouchers, as secretary, I reviewed them and just probably